On September 6, 2024, Concord shut down its servers forever. But why was that newsworthy? Games shut down their servers all the time. Why was Concord such a big deal? Well, unlike most games, Concord servers weren't shut down after 10 or 5 or even 1 year. They were shut down after only 14 days. And not only did Concord servers go offline, it was pulled from every digital and physical retailer in the world. Sony, the publisher of the game, refunded all copies sold worldwide. This whole debacle placed Concord in second place in the list of games that were available for the least amount of time, only behind The Culling 2. For reference, The Day Before, which was thought of by many to be a scam game, managed to stay in online stores for 45 days. But Concord wasn't a scam, it was a complete game, and according to the few people that actually managed to play it, it wasn't even a bad one. To top it all off, Concord reportedly cost as much as $400 million to make and had around 8 years in development time. But how did all of this happen? How does one game even get to this point? Well, that's what we're here to talk about. The day this video comes out will mark the game's 1-year anniversary, and I think this would be the perfect time to take a look back at Concord's tumultuous history, from its development all the way to it getting delisted. So sit back, relax, and let me tell you the story of gaming's most expensive failure. Our story begins in... well, it's unclear when our story actually begins. Concord's development apparently started in 2016, 8 years before its launch. But wait a minute, the team that developed the game, Firewalk Studios, was founded in 2018, so that doesn't really make any sense. The problem with examining Concord's development is that nobody from within Firewalk has rushed to talk about the process behind the making of the game. There's a lot of numbers floating around that are unverifiable, meaning that we will have to do a lot of speculating in this video. You see, Firewalk was founded by a group of experienced ex-Bungie employees, the key here being that they all worked in the same company and on the same game. Ryan Ellis was the creative director for Destiny, Elena Siegman was a producer for that same game, and Tony Xu may have been a general manager over at Activision, but he was also the senior vice president of the Destiny IP. And it doesn't end here. Firewalk was established as part of Probably Monsters, a publishing studio that doesn't make any games itself but funds other developers' projects. The CEO of that company being ex-Bungie CEO Harold Ryan. Do you see what I'm getting at? These people weren't random devs uniting to make a new studio, they were working on the same game at the same time. Which makes me believe that the reason Concord was apparently being worked on for longer than the studio making it actually existed was because this was not initially meant as a standalone game. It was probably meant as an expansion to Destiny's Crucible, its PvP multiplayer mode. And there's this little known game released in 2016 that just might have inspired Concord. When Overwatch was launched in 2016, it became an overnight sensation. It made millions upon millions of dollars, it won Game of the Year 2016 for some godforsaken reason, and most importantly, it made every executive in the world say, "I want that." Everyone had to make a hero shooter. Call of Duty became a hero shooter, with Battlefield following a few years later, and while these studios were big enough to sidestep any repercussions this shift would bring, we also got many new IPs that tried to follow Overwatch's success and immediately sunk. Remember Lawbreakers? Remember Rocket Arena? Remember Battleborn? I could go on, but all these games shut down their servers fairly quickly after launch because they just couldn't compete with Overwatch. And Battleborn came out 2 weeks before it. Now, I'm not a pattern recognition specialist, but the warning signs for Concord's eventual demise were always there. But wait, you might say, well, obviously not right now, but before the game came out, Concord will be different because it will have a very big budget. Let's talk about Concord's budget. Initially, the game's budget was reported to be somewhere between $50 and $200 million. Then, Colin Moriarty, owner of the Last Stand series of podcasts, claimed that he spoke to a source that was working on the game and that its budget was around $400 million, 200 from initial investments and 200 more when Sony eventually bought out the studio. That number would place Concord firmly in 8th place for the most expensive game ever made among titles with official figures available. That is a mouth-watering amount, and there's a high probability that it just isn't true. Multiple different industry insiders like Kotaku's Ethan Katz, The Verge's Tom Warren, and GameIndustries.biz Christopher Dring were quick to dispute that claim, with Dring specifically mentioning how there is no way a studio with half the staff of the team making Spider-Man 2 would get that type of funding. So it was kind of agreed upon that Concord's budget was around the $200 million mark. But then, a Kotaku article published 2 months after the game was shut down by Ethan Katz, the same guy that disputed the earlier figure, said that $200 million was the initial budget for the game, but it wasn't enough to cover all development costs, nor is it taking into account Sony's purchase of the IP rights. This is getting uncomfortably close to that $400 million budget, isn't it? Let's take a step back. I glossed over the fact that Sony acquired the studio in 2023. One of Firewalk's founders, Tony Hsu, talked about how Sony was very supportive of the project from the beginning. Moreover, they made an agreement with Probably Monsters all the way back in 2021 to publish the game before outright buying the studio 2 years later. Sony got Haven Studios of the very recently cancelled Fair Games game and Bungie to also help with the development of Concord. So everything was set. Concord was set to be the next big king of the hero shooters, and it was launching a public beta in July of 2024. On the lead up to that, we got a bunch of cinematics inspired by Guardians of the Galaxy that indicated the game would have an ever-evolving story just like Destiny. But when players finally got their hands on the game, it was met largely with indifference. Some liked it, some didn't like it, but the general consensus was that it was mostly fine. There were some gameplay complaints that feel rather pointless to talk about now, like how the game felt slow or how you were essentially forced to switch characters in between rounds, but by far the number one complaint for this game were the characters. Not their gameplay necessarily, but how they looked. And I mean, yeah, I doubt you could find a lot of people on this earth that find these characters cool or interesting to play as. But you know what? The game had a solid foundation, and more characters could always be patched in at a later date. Maybe not what you would expect from that much of a budget, but it still looked salvageable. It would still get players, it's a free-to-play game after all, and Firewalk, what is that 4 doing next to the 0? This cost $40? Okay, this is fine. Look, 6 months before Concord's release, Helldivers 2 was also multiplayer only, and it also cost $40. But here's the problem. I know Earth Defense Force was the first to do this type of game, but Helldivers was the first to bring it to a mainstream audience. It was something fresh, it was exciting, and even from the outside looking in, it felt like something you needed to play. It's very fun to curb stomp bugs with your friends. And despite it having the $40 price tag, it felt justified simply by how well made of a game it was. Concord, on the other hand, used a formula that worked for only 2 other games, the last one being released 8 years before it, and both of them hanging on by a thread in 2024. Concord's innovations didn't really gel with players, its characters didn't pull people in, and the $40 price tag was simply the final nail in the coffin. To be honest, I don't know if this game would have worked even if it was free. Maybe it would have lasted more than 2 weeks, but I really doubt it would have had a long and prosperous life cycle regardless of price. In preparation for this video, I accidentally listened to the official PlayStation podcast episode regarding Concord. I say accidentally because a Redditor made a claim that in this very podcast, it is stated by Firewalk devs themselves that they worked on the game for 10 years. And no, Viva VIP1, working on a game for nearly a decade does not mean that they worked on it for 10 years. It probably means that they worked on it for 8 years, which by all counts is the correct number. Just like if I say I have nearly 1000 subscribers, doesn't mean that I have that number of subs. But you can help me get there by subscribing to the channel if you're enjoying the video. I ended up listening to the entire podcast featuring Concord's lead gameplay designer and lead character designer, and the vibe that I got from it was 2 passionate people talking about this new thing that they made. They genuinely sound excited to share with the world what they've cooked up, and they give specific examples of what they're enjoying about the game. And I know they weren't going to trash the game a couple of weeks ahead of launch, but they seem to be coming from a genuine place of love of what they had created. But this may also point to another problem. Remember that Colin Moriarty report with the $400 million budget? Well, in that same report, he said that a lot of toxic positivity existed within the studio, that everything was great and that the project was too big to fail. Well, let's find out, shall we? On August 23rd, 2024, Concord was released and nobody bought it. It peaked at under 700 concurrent players according to SteamDB, and according to an IGN report, it sold a pitiful 25,000 copies. If we take the $400 million budget as fact, that's $16,000 spent per copy sold. According to the few people that actually played it, it was an alright game, but in this industry, alright simply doesn't cut it. Nowadays, the aim of a lot of publishers is the creation of the infinite game. A live service game that will hook players so much that they will continue to play it day after day for the rest of their lives. That's the goal at least, and some games have succeeded at that to a point. FIFA is like a 9 to 5 job now. Destiny keeps bringing people back in with each expansion. But the problem with the infinite game is that there can only be so many of them. In order for Concord to succeed, it would have to be better than Overwatch, better than Destiny, better than almost every other competitor in the market, and by all accounts, it was very far from that. Unsurprisingly, Concord was eventually taken offline, but surprisingly, this happened only just 2 weeks after its launch on September 6, 2024. I would have loved to play Concord for this video. On this channel, I have videos on high profile flops like Immortals of Avium and Dragon Age the Veilguard, because no matter how mediocre or bad these games can be, it also feels like playing through a part of gaming history. It's the reason why I played through Anthem before it gets delisted for a video that'll be out in about 6 months. It's genuinely sad that you can't play Concord anymore. As fun as it is dunking on it, I wish I could see for myself where it went wrong. I'll never be able to do that, and even though I know I'm not missing out on much, I don't know, it just sucks. A glimmer of hope did appear a few weeks later, with SteamDB showing that the game was actively being worked on, possibly preparing for a relaunch. Sony, however, would quickly dismantle any hope as it shut down Firewalk Studios just a few days later. In their farewell letter, Firewalk mentioned the difficulties the studio faced, including the pandemic, and interestingly, mentioning that the game was in full production for only 2 years. I'm not really experienced with game dev enough to know exactly what this means. Does that mean the other 6 years were spent just tossing ideas around? The game's development timeline is still a bit of a mystery. Firewalk says that full production started in 2022, while devs in leading roles have gone on record saying the game was being worked on for 8 years. And I think these two things don't have to be mutually exclusive. The most likely scenario at this point is that Concord started out as a small project, Destiny DLC or not, and as more money was injected into the game and as the studio itself grew in size, the project kept becoming bigger and bigger before they finally decided to make what would become Concord. Until somebody from Firewalk talks about this, we can't know for sure, but to me, this does look like the most logical scenario given the publicly available information. Concord is an interesting case. A game with an obscene budget, made for an audience that didn't exist, and made in a genre that nobody wanted. I'm sorry, did I say nobody wanted? I meant everyone wanted, because about 4 months after the game was shut down, Marvel Rivals was launched and it took the world by storm, pun very much intended. It peaked at 650,000 players on Steam alone, almost 1,000 times more than Concord, and to this day has a daily player count at around 50 to 100,000 players. And as a concept, it's simple. What if we took Overwatch, but every character was a Marvel hero? Don't take this as a recommendation of the game. I've never even played it. I never really got into hero shooters. Why ruin your friendship over a hero shooter when you can do that just as easily in virtual basketball? But even as an outsider, I fully get the appeal. It sounds cool that Spider-Man and Iron Man can fight each other. Concord's answer to that would have been a fight between generic character A and generic character B. Sony's venture into live service gaming has not gone really well. With the exception of Helldivers 2, every other Sony live service game has either been cancelled or flopped, with Concord being the flag bearer for these failures. I think the message by consumers is loud and clear. Either make a really good or at least interesting live service game, or give us the single player story games that you are incredible at making. Even if this story is a sad one, I hope I can end this on a positive note. I really hope these failures can show publishers that maybe it isn't worth it to chase the next life-devouring game. Maybe these funds and resources are better off going to artists that have a story to tell or a gameplay concept to show off. Look at the games that are doing well in 2025. None of them are live service games other than the already established IPs. Even looking at Sony's catalog, it's games like God of War, Spider-Man, and Horizon that do well for them. It's not Foam Stars, it's not Destruction All-Stars, and it's definitely not Concord. Thank you for watching the video, and thank you for 500 subscribers as well. It's genuinely heartwarming to see so many of you enjoying the content, and I hope I can keep providing that. If you want to support the channel further, I've set up a YouTube membership. I don't really have the time to offer anything of value other than reading your name at the end of the video, but it's less than a coffee per month, and even $1 could go a long way for the channel. If you want to keep watching, you can click here to watch everything regarding Kojima's split with Konami, and until then, I'll see you in the next one.